Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you all here. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. While we're waiting, I'm going to launch a poll and learn a little bit more about who is joining us today. And also, I welcome you all to introduce yourselves in the chat so we can say hello. Thanks everyone for being here today. For those who just joined, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and go ahead and respond to our poll, and we'll get started in just a second. I see people are still joining, so I'll wait just a couple more minutes. See, some people are still joining, so we're going to wait just another minute or so. But while we're waiting, feel free to respond to our poll questions. We can see who all is here, and feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Share what organization you're with or entity, your role, and where you're located. And it's great to see a lot of friends and colleagues and so many people from all around the country. So we're really thrilled to have you all here today. I'll give it just a little minute more. It looks like it's starting to slow down. So I'll give you one more minute to respond to the poll, and then we'll get started. All right, I'm going to end the poll. And I'll share the results. Looks like we have a good mix of people from different backgrounds, a lot of educators, community members, social workers, and behavioral health folks, and a number of attorneys. So thank you all for being here today. My name is Jamie Beck, and I am the President and Managing Attorney of Free to Thrive. And it is such an honor and a privilege to be able to introduce this panel and have this discussion today on this topic. So for those of you who've attended our past trainings on trauma, you are very familiar with Dr. Brittany Greenbaum, who is one of the people who has taught me so much about trauma and how that relates to the work that we do at Free to Thrive. Very grateful to have Dr. Brittany Greenbaum, and joined with Brittany, Charlie Quinn, who Dr. Greenbaum will introduce in a minute, who's also an incredible person in this space and also a really talented artist on top of everything you'll learn today. The genesis of this training is that, as you have probably seen from trauma trainings that you've attended, triggers are something that is often touched on in a training. You have this hour-long or several hours-long training on trauma, and maybe you get, a couple minutes, maybe 5 minutes on what a trigger is, how it works, what happens when somebody's triggered, what the science is behind it. And if you work with trauma victims, which I imagine many, if not most of you do, since you're here today, that's part of our work every single day, is working with triggers and what happens when your clients are triggered, how you help them work through that, what it even means. And so at Free to Thrive, we're having these discussions about triggers and trying to really support our clients in our work. And of course, went to Dr. Greenbaum, who is our source on all things trauma, and said, Dr. Greenbaum, could you train us on triggers? And then we realized that we don't just need this training at Free to Thrive, we all need this training. And so we decided to open it up to our whole community to learn along with us. And so I'm just grateful to be here to learn from both of you today. And just a couple quick housekeeping items, and then we'll get it started. One is if you're an attorney licensed in California and would like MCLE, please make sure you stay till the end. We'll ask a poll question at the very end so that we can capture your names and make sure we get you your CLE credit. We will also this is being recorded. We will share the recording. We'll share the slides afterwards in an email to everybody who's registered. Feel free to share it with other people who are not in attendance, and we'll do our best to save time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to put your questions in as you have them, but we will do our best to save time. And I think that's it. So without further ado, Dr. Greenbaum and Charlie Quinn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. We are stoked to be here. Jamie already introduced me, so I think we're just going to pass by this, but owner of a trauma healing center and an ATHC psychology, my new businesses. I'm a licensed psychologist and a trauma and compassionate human being and a clinician. So I said we were going to pass that and clearly didn't, but now I'm going to take a moment to introduce Charlie Quinn. So Charlie Quinn uses pronouns they, them. They are a missing youth specialist for child welfare. They are a survivor leader. They're a consultant that I have the privilege of working with regularly. They have their master's degree in social work, and they are licensed in both Kansas and Missouri. And they are a trauma and inclusivity focused advocate and a very big advocate and enthusiast of cinnamon rolls. And they're an expert in cinnamon rolls. Charlie, do you want to add anything about yourself here?
No, you did a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, all right, let's jump into everything. Next slide, please.
So setting up the space there for expectations and norms, we wanted to create a really safe space for everyone and comfortable space for a learning environment, because we are going to be covering a lot of traumatizing and triggering content as we discuss this topic. So we encourage you to take care of yourself throughout this presentation. We don't really have a preference, cameras on or off. You can stay or leave at your discretion. If you need to run to the restroom or grab a drink of water, there's not going to be any breaks because we're running through a lot of content. So feel free to take the time you need. I'm going to let Brittany touch on the empathize in, curious intellect out real quick.
So basically by that, we mean that if you are feeling open and you have enough health in you today, enough food, water, energy, when we're talking about some of these trauma things, try to feel into the experience. Try to think about how that might be if you were in that situation, and kind of put yourself in those shoes for a minute. But let's say you're a little exhausted. This is part of the middle of your day. You got a whole bunch more going on. If you start to feel a little bit overwhelmed by any of the trauma stuff that we're talking about, or just kind of the intensity of it in any regard, take a second to ask yourself a question about it. When we turn on our curious brain or get intellectually, again, curious about the situation, we tend to get out of our emotional state of mind and can digest the information a bit differently. So empathize in if you're open, curious out if you need to help protect yourself, support yourself a little bit more. Charlie, you want to pick up?
Oh, yes. Sorry. I was struggling with the getting it to click. Yeah. So since we're moving through really fast with this presentation, getting a lot of content in, you may want to ask questions in the chat, and we have folks monitoring. We may not get to the questions until the end of the presentation, but they are important to us. And also, this is just an introduction. There's a lot left to cover. So you may have things to add to this that we haven't included in this, and you are welcome to provide that to us.
All right, so what are our goals today? I really want to help build an understanding and empathy with trauma triggers and boundaries. We can understand what trauma is, but dealing with it in the moment when somebody is really activated by their experience can be really challenging for us. And if we can empathize and really come to understand, again, those two key words of today, what this experience is, we might be able to respond a little bit better to help negotiate the situation, have better outcomes. I want to explore how trauma may be triggered throughout different stages of the legal process, because different things might be activated at different times, even though it might happen at any time. We'll get into more of that later. And I also want to just remind people about the trauma-informed approach, which when we practice from this perspective, it tends to make us feel more confident and make healthy choices when we're navigating difficult moments. So we're going to have a little bit where we're adding in some tools today that might be helpful for you to use in these moments. We're going to talk about communication, both with your client and in a courtroom briefly. And we're going to just briefly also talk about caring for your own trauma and vicarious trauma in these spaces. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so I've used the word empathy, compassion, and trauma triggers already so many times. Let's sit here and define them and hold them for just a second. So when we're talking about empathy, we're talking about specifically to feel in with someone. So when I am empathizing with them, my brain is trying to mimic what their brain is doing. So our mirror neurons are active. And if they're feeling sad, I'm going to feel sad with them. If they're happy, I'm going to feel happy with them. We're sharing the emotional experience and connecting with each other through what's happening. Compassion is a little bit different than empathy. Empathy is always a part of compassion, but compassion isn't always a part of empathy. Compassion means to empathize with the suffering someone is experiencing. So it's not just, I see that you're sad and I'm feeling sad with you, but it's, I see that you're sad. I can understand how you're feeling sad somewhat because I'm empathizing with it. And now how can we move to helping you alleviate the suffering that you're experiencing? So empathy, we can get kind of stuck sometimes just feeling with the person and it can get kind of overwhelming. When we step into the compassion, it's like, I see your suffering. I'm going to respond to your suffering in a way to help reduce future suffering. And this is really what we want to practice and bring into working with trauma survivors and when we're dealing with trauma triggers in a moment. So just a quick reminder, trauma is seriously negative events that happen to us or events that overwhelm our coping skills. We do not have the ability to support ourselves through that experience because it's beyond our norm. We've had no training for it before and our brain's like, what is happening? I don't know what to do. So it's trying to make sense of something that it never had to connect with before, something that overwhelms it. So trauma triggers are data that pull us back to our trauma. When we experience a trauma trigger, we are not responding as the present moment is happening. Our brain literally jumps us back to that moment and thinks that we're in that situation again, and we're responding in our survival mechanism state. So unlike just remembering something where I have a little bit more control over it, I can kind of look at it from different angles and resonate with it in kind of a I'm in control spot. When we're dealing with trauma triggers, when someone is triggered into their trauma, they are back in their survival instincts, their prefrontal lobe is shutting down, and they just have to respond how their body is helping them do, because that's what it's telling them they need to do to stay safe from the past, not the present moment. And these triggers can come in through a variety of mechanisms. They can be sensory based, somebody touching you maybe in a certain way, or you smell something and you're like, oh, that smell reminds me of this, or actually triggers me back to this experience. It can be emotionally based, maybe feeling angry makes you remember all the times, or again, not remember, but feel back into that experience of being angry in a past situation. And they can be thought based and they can occur when you know what they are, and they can occur at random. So they can be really overwhelming for an individual who doesn't know when they're going to run into them. Or if you have an extensive trauma history, there's so many different things that can be your trigger that can be really hard to get a sense of what's upsetting you in a particular moment. So boundaries. Going to just briefly touch on that here, and we're going to go back into talking about triggers and boundaries a little bit more in just a couple slides. But boundaries really set the markers around what we deem acceptable and how we will allow people to treat us. So we put boundaries around things to keep ourselves safe. Charlie, is there anything you want to add to these?
So as far as the way that people are looking at boundaries, it can look very different to different people. And from a survivor leader lens, boundaries are something that is not understood and is not implied. And so if you're working with a survivor leader or working with any sort of survivor, being able to define those boundaries very clearly on what it means for you and your lens can help provide the context to helping a survivor be able to determine what their own boundaries are in working together.
I believe you're doing our next slide too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of my favorite topics, flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. This is a graphic that we found that we thought was really, really summed up nicely what is manifested when somebody has a trauma stress response, and really divided up the different behavior responses. And so, when we are triggered, we operate from a survival-based instinct. And, maybe in the chat, you guys can come up with some other ones. But some of the ones that we really thought were great, and as far as fight goes, is anger outbursts, demanding perfection from others, demeaning ways of speaking to others. So like if somebody is triggered at work or triggered on the job, just triggered in general, you see them controlling others. There's a sense of entitlement, narcissistic tendencies, bullying, and just basically trying to regulate themselves in a fight sense. And that doesn't really work out because they're in a trauma brain. So there is no regulation when it comes to trigger brain. Now with flight, it's really more about avoidance and leading with those obsessive or compulsive tendencies, feeling of anxiety or panic, being a workaholic, which we had some discussion about on our team was, how can you be a workaholic and that fall under flight, which all comes back to the avoidance of it. You're avoiding something that makes you feel really uncomfortable and triggered. So you're doing everything you can to pile things. Like for me, if I have a deadline that I'm super triggered by, I'm trying to manically clean around me. And I don't realize it until, I pushed it to the last minute. Now I'm procrastinating, which is part of the flight response of being triggered. And then you have the freeze response, which is feeling some brain fog, spacing out, difficulty making decisions on the fly. If you've ever put somebody on the spot, or I know in the legal setting, it can happen when you are questioning someone on the stand and they just kind of blank out and look at you and they're having a freeze response. Difficulty taking action, wants to hide from the world, becoming a couch potato. And then with the fawn responses, I tend to fall into that sometimes where I can go into people pleasing real quick. Survivors developing some codependent relationships, staying in a violent relationship, having little to no boundaries, flattering others, because if you flatter others and make them happy, they're less likely to harm you, and not being able to speak up for yourself. So Brittany, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I'll just add, we have other trainings that we've done with Free to Thrive that cover this in a bit more detail too. So feel free to go check out our previous trainings. And just the reminder that the survival instinct that our body goes with in the particular moment isn't something that we're consciously choosing. In that survival moment, our prefrontal lobe, where we store all of our ability to think clearly, have linear time, know that 2 + 2 = 4, make a lot of rational thoughts from, it's not accessible. It's not important to remember that in a survival moment. So our earlier developed brains, our midbrain and hindbrain, are going to be the ones controlling that initial response. So if it goes against what you would like yourself to do, just know that you can work on that response in your body. You can learn about it and how to manage it. But in those moments, we don't have as much control as we would like. And we have to make peace with that and support ourselves through those experiences. So be gentle with yourselves, be gentle with your clients when they go into one of these places, because it can be really overwhelming to feel out of control over how you would even want to respond in a moment.
And Jamie was kind enough to put the past trainings in the chat for you. So.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. All right, so going back to triggers and boundaries. So I hope we have a better sense, or we've increased some of your understanding of what triggers are and boundaries are. But let's talk a little bit more in detail about that. So some triggers are more universal, right? Hate speech tends to trigger people. Not pronouncing someone's name correctly, not using their preferred pronouns can be a trigger for a lot of people. And we want to kind of avoid those in general. So think about what might be some universal triggers, maybe write them down for yourself and think of how you make sure that you don't trigger in this way. If you don't know how to pronounce someone's name, how are you going to help yourself learn it? There's a lot of things online where you can type in a name and it can tell you how to pronounce it, so you can try again and again. You can play with your language with other people and working on making sure you have pronouns correctly and eliminating hate speech. I think, pay attention to what you're saying. If you're getting feedback that what you're saying is harmful to somebody, listen to that and try to do better. We then have our own personal triggers. So personal triggers are the ones that relate to you and your specific experience in life situations. So for example, I'm going to be a little silly here, but let's say my trigger was yogurt, right? I had a bad experience with yogurt when I was younger. I do not like the smell of it. It does not make me feel good. This might be a trigger for me. If I smell it and it takes me back to that moment when I got sick from it, that might be really hard for me. And I want to do things to protect myself from maybe having to go through that experience if it's harmful to me. So I might want some boundary around that. But we have to be careful when we're imposing our own triggers and boundaries onto other people, and we need to be mindful of how we respond to them. So if I'm triggered by yogurt, I might have the boundary of, if you're in my office, don't eat yogurt. That seems like it's pretty okay. I'm not extending it beyond the space that I'm in control of. But let's say I'm the boss of the company and I'm like, yogurt cannot be in our office at all. Nobody can have yogurt here. I don't want to hear the word. Well, yogurt's actually a pretty harmless thing. If I'm imposing that upon everybody, I'm taking something that's harmful to me or I experience as harmful that isn't, and I'm putting that on other people, which isn't a healthy or kind thing to do. So we really want to pay attention to the boundaries that we do hold and understand what they're there for and how do they impact the other people around us. We want to also know how we respond to them. So let's say I smell yogurt and it just kind of makes me queasy. Well, I can tolerate that, right? I know how to calm myself down. I can use some essential oils, help my body like smell something different. But maybe it would make me really angry. Maybe it sends me into a complete rage. I need to learn this about myself so then I can decide how I can respond. So maybe if I learned that yogurt makes me really rageful, if I see a yogurt, I'm going to go to the other side of the room and I'm going to go vent that out so I don't harm people with what's going on for me. Some other just common triggers for people too, going back to the universal ones, include making people feel unsafe, people feeling unheard or powerless. They don't feel like they have a choice. They feel like they're being disrespected or feel like they're being made to feel stupid or they don't understand something. So sometimes the triggers can be a very concrete thing like a smell, a food, a person. And other times they're more about how we are feeling in that exchange with someone. So if you see that you're talking to someone and they like are a little checked out or a little distant, or you just kind of sense that their energy shifted, that might be a really good to check in and say, hey, what's going on? I noticed that something shifted and I want to make sure that I didn't hurt or offend you or trigger you in some way while we were discussing this. And so I can do better next time. So it's about engaging in dialogue around this. With boundaries too, it's really important to communicate what your needs are for them. And if you know them up front, be clear about them with the people in your life. So if you know that you're not going to pick up the phone after 5 o'clock, it's important for your clients to know that, so they don't sit and call you repeatedly after 5 o'clock and you're like, why are they ignoring me? Why can't they pick up the phone? Have that message really clearly laid out to people. And if you are upset by certain types of things, like just know that too and let people know like, oh, if you bring up yogurt around me, I might get a little bit queasy and a little bit awkward for a minute. That's because it's a thing for me, but it doesn't need to be for you. And I'm going to work to make sure that doesn't interfere with our relationship. So we take ownership of the ways that we can bring our own triggers and our own needs for boundaries to relationships. All right. Anything to add on that, Charlie, or should we do the next slide?
Yeah, I think I was just going to add from my own experiences of like, usually what I have to do is communicate. If I see someone in a military uniform, I might go a little hazy for a little bit, but I've got my own tools to be able to bring myself back and ground myself. If I smell a certain sandwich or smell a certain type of deodorant, it's a trigger for me and I have my own responses. And so you just never know like what is going to trigger someone, because those are very common when walking a survivor into a any sort of court. Like you never know who's going to be at court. Somebody might have a military uniform on. So like just having the conversation and the relationship to have those conversations is important. And
all right, so we're going to provide a little bit more context into mental health here, just because I think this can help us better relate and understand what might be going on for a human being. So when we are well fed, had enough sleep, been exercising for a while, all of our relationships seem to be going pretty well, and we are enjoying our work, and man, I feel like I'm on a smooth train here for a minute. we might be in a really optimal level of mental health. They're categorizing it as ready here. It means that we're more psychologically flexible and adaptive to the different stresses going on in our life. If we start having a couple stresses keep piling up a little bit and we're just like having a hard time getting going and just trying to manage something new in our life, we might move into reacting where it's like, oh, okay, got to get this done. How am I going to get this done? Maybe I'm a little bit stressed, more irritable, not as motivated or as focused as I used to be. Most people often bounce back and forth between reacting and ready throughout the course of a week, or even, kind of daily sometimes, depending on what our jobs are and our responsibilities are. So just think about yourself for a second. How did you sleep last night? Are you able to take in new and process new information, hold new ideas, or are you a little bit more like, I need to take care of myself, protect my energy, because maybe you're a little bit vulnerable today? If those vulnerabilities pile up for a while and the problems kind of keep increasing and our coping skills aren't kind of matching the situation we're in, we move into this kind of orange category that they're calling injured, where we might feel like more loss of control, be a little bit more depressed or panicky, maybe a little bit distant from our usual self and feel maybe guilty or shame. This can come from when we experience life threats or losses as well. And just like I said, that wear and tear of daily life. I think given the pandemic and the past couple of years of what's been going on, and as well as the current war happening and everything else in this country in terms of laws and whatnot, I think a lot of people are really moving between injured and reacting right now. We're really sad and trying to heal country and humans right now after going through so much. So if you're not at your optimum level of self, that's probably pretty normal right now. What we really want to pay attention to too is when we move into this kind of category they're calling ill or red. This is when we have maybe mental health diagnoses, underlying distresses that keep hitting us that we really don't have the coping skills for. We've had traumas happen that we're trying to recover from, and we're really struggling to get through our day-to-day life experiences. If you are working with survivors of trauma, probably in the legal context, you're probably working with people who are operating more from the ill or injured spectrum of this continuum, which means that they're going to probably have a harder time recovering in difficult moments and maybe not have all the coping skills needed to handle certain situations. If we can empathize with that reality that, man, if I'm having to talk to a lawyer, I don't know what's going to happen with my fate, or I'm trying to get this clear to move my life on, we might be really overwhelmed. And if we can care about that with that person, maybe we can respond more kindly when they're doing things that don't make sense to us, and we can support them in learning new behaviors or just managing it enough to get through the process that you need them to go through. If you ignore it and you pretend like it's not there, or you just keep getting annoyed by it, you will do harm to yourself and that relationship, because you'll be frustrated constantly with them. You're not going to do as good of a job, which will affect your sense of self at work. And that person's not maybe going to want to keep connecting with you or doing work with you. And it might lead to them just dropping out entirely. So the more that we can empathize with the person's situation and help ourselves care about it in an active way without taking it on, the more we can be effective at our jobs with people. Charlie, anything to add to that, or should we keep going? I know our time is going.
Yeah, I think that you summed that up quite nicely. And so I don't really have anything to add. So I'll go ahead and push forward.
So yeah, we're gonna take a second here to just sit in these feelings for a second. Maybe even just put in the chat, and Charlie's gonna follow up with whatever you guys put in the chat if you choose to engage. But what kind of things are triggers for you, or what do you think are some universal triggers? And how do you have boundaries around them? How do you make sure your boundaries don't harm other people? Maybe even take a second to empathize with how hard it is to maintain our emotions and perform when we're triggered. Or even if we're just having a bad day. Maybe the kids in the morning were really loud, it took forever to get them to school. You show up for work a little bit late, you're flustered, and your first client comes in the door. Isn't it hard to show up and engage with the person? And think about if multiple things had piled on, and you had a whole bunch of trauma that you were trying to manage as well. You didn't know the setting you're going to. It can really overwhelm a person and make it hard to engage. And we want to care about this so that we can care more about our clients. So imagine you're a client. What do you need? What's important to know about a new setting, new people? What about what it means to have no training in the parameters of court? How would that feel? Thank you, Wendy, for adding to the chat there. Charlie, I will let you share the comment since we got one.
Yeah, Wendy mentioned loud noises, anything that takes them out of distraction mode. I used them because I wasn't aware what your pronouns were yet. Having a hard time with hugs, startle easily. Yeah, that's actually one where I don't think a lot of people understand that not everybody is okay with hugs. And it goes into consent. And I'm also one of those people. I'm not a big hugger, and it just drives me insane and is triggering when people expect me to hug them. People behind me, tone of voice, treating me like I'm clueless, and lies are my universal, lying are my universal triggers. I do believe it helps for there to be a survivor advocate in court with them. No touching, yeah, hugs. People say that I'm a hugger and don't take no for an answer. Consent is so important. People to close on my personal space makes me nervous. All good examples.
And think about that. All of those information that we got there, people saying, I don't want to be hugged, loud noises, people behind me. All of these things are possible and happening in the court setting to some degree for people. So what if you knew what your client's triggers were? What if you had had that conversation saying, hey, people get triggered in spaces. Do you know what any of yours are? How can we help prepare you for having them? Because in the courtroom, people are going to be sitting behind you. There are going to be loud noises. So we want to be able to support people in their experience, and we can't support them as well if we don't understand what it is for them in particular. And I know that adds to your already exhaustive jobs. I hope that adding this in, though, takes off some of the emotional and psychological pressure and strain that can come in when you're trying to understand somebody and they're just not making sense to you, if we can put it through the trauma-informed lens, which I believe is the next slide.
Yeah, one more thing before we switch slides. And one of the things I do as somebody that regularly goes with youth and families to court is that I have to kind of walk them through what it's going to look like in the environment and all of that, because their triggers may be something they can identify on the front end and identify with me, and then we can work together to form a plan.
All right, I am going to do this slide extremely fast because there are presentations out there of me doing this, and I really want to make sure we have time for the content and questions. So trauma-informed principles, there are 6 of them. You put this through the framework of what you're doing, you think about them through it, and you act from these principles, and it tends to include this trauma-informed lens of making choices better. So safety, are this person physically, emotionally, psychologically safe? Are you engaging in a trustworthy and transparent way? Encouraging peer support and mutual self-help, collaborating with your client and respecting the mutuality of each other, empowering your client, hearing their voice, promoting their voice, and following their choice, and really respecting cultural, historical, and gender issues in the context of the relationship. So think about these. Think about how you use them. Where do you think you maybe could do more? Go watch some previous presentations on it. I really believe in these principles. I think they can be fundamentally helpful in changing the way you practice to help you feel more empowered and control and help your clients feel more safe in interacting. So please check it out. Next slide, please.
Now we're going to go into trauma triggers in the legal setting. And so as we've been talking a lot about triggers and going into depth about them, we have set up the story that everything has the potential to be a trigger to someone. And, you know, I've shared some of mine. I know that a lot of the clients that I have gone to court with have shared things like just door paneling or a certain smell in the courtroom, or just the fact that there's an attorney in there, there's a judge sitting up there and that makes them nervous, and all these different things that are out of their control. They can be triggered by anything. And sometimes you will be able to assist and help, and other times you will not, because it is out of your control what triggers them and how they respond to it. But what you can do is try to build a level of empathy and relationship with them, and help and allow them to know that you care enough about them to have that be part of the plan moving forward. And that sets a really solid baseline for a successful outcome. Brittany, did you want to add to this?
I think that this is the second part is really hard here. When you know you probably want to be able to help, or maybe you want to be able to help and don't even have the energy for it sometimes. And when you see someone suffering, we tend to care, or we get overwhelmed by it and pull away from caring. So it's a really hard space to be with somebody who's having a trigger in a moment and trying to navigate what to do. And when we can't do something, sometimes that can make us feel pretty bad. But remember, not doing something when you don't have the ability to is doing something, because you're not adding to the harm. So knowing that limitation means that you're not potentially contributing to more harm being done. And it's okay to acknowledge that to the person, to say, I'd really like to be able to help you here, but I don't think I have the skills, or I don't have the time or the energy to be able to show up in a way that I think would be safe and productive. And letting that be okay with yourself too. You are a human. You only have so much capacity. Don't forget that. It's okay to protect your energy. It's important and essential to protect your energy. All right. So gonna just talk through the prep work that I would recommend before. I am not someone who goes to court. I'm not a legal representative in any way. So I recognize that I'm not the expert here, you guys are. So take and leave what sounds good to you here. And let us know if you would like us to add anything, or you think that we're wrong about something too. We are not experts. We are people sharing our trauma knowledge, because we are trauma experts here. So before you meet with a client, I really do encourage thinking through their experience with what you have about them, with whatever information you're giving, and trying to empathize with that experience ahead of time, so that you can kind of take stock of where they're coming from. Where are they meeting you at? So where is this person physically before they meet with you? Are they home? Are they with family? Are they homeless? Are they in jail? What's the kind of stress that they're coming from? What that might shape how you're interacting with them today. If they've been homeless, they might not have as much sleep. If they're in jail, they might not have as much desire to be open. They might be a little bit more guarded. They've been safe with their family. Maybe they are able to open up and share a little bit more. We don't know. So we want to kind of consider how these things might impact them. What are the support systems in place for this person? What resources do you know they have or they might need? I really recommend getting kind of a resource list together with some of your peers, so you guys have referrals easily, so that if you have a need, your client has a need that you can't meet, that you have access to getting them that support or connecting them to an option. Consider what might be the potential outcomes of their situation, if you know ahead of time. And if you don't, maybe after they leave, just kind of sit and resonate with that. And maybe take a note or two to just jar your memory the next time you go and open up their file to work with them. Like, remember, these are the important parts to empathize with. This is like the fear that they might be coming in with. And then think about historically how the person you're meeting with and how that person's identities have been treated in the legal system. We know that the legal system hasn't been equal or just for all. So think about the fears that that person might be bringing in from historical situations, from familial situations, and from their own histories too. And care about that fear, talk about it as if it's real. Don't try to minimize it or try to make it like, oh, the court's doing so much better. Acknowledge, empathize, and let them know how you're going to try to help their experience be different. Anything to add on the prep work part before we go into the next, Charlie?
Yeah, so the history part is really important because it adds some contextual value with understanding that not the inequities that can take place with marginalized communities, but also if somebody has had a really horrible experience in court, if they've experienced their children being removed, if they've experienced anything that would be along the lines of what their trafficker told them that would happen, because traffickers are always manipulating the minds of survivors into thinking that no one cares about them. And usually what they say is that helping professionals, no matter who they are, no matter how nice they seem, don't care about you. And that is reinforced over and over again in the justice system, and all of these different systems that don't represent marginalized communities with equity. And so having that historical context will help you understand like what it's going to take to get to this person to the next step to get the justice that they deserve, because that is bottom line usually the number one reason why survivors don't report.
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
All right, so the next couple of slides, we have broken down into different stages of the court proceedings. So we have this kind of first meeting pre-court, then we go to court, and then we go to post-court, and we break it down from triggers to trauma-informed options and ways to address it. And each of the trigger slide has like potential fears that might be part of the triggers and how that might look for a person. So just know that's what like the next 6 slides are gonna be, or 7, so just feel free to know that there's gonna be a lot of content on these slides. So potential fears in the first meeting in pre-court: telling your story, fear of being re-traumatized and telling it, not knowing what the outcomes of the proceeding may be, not even knowing maybe what could be the options. It might be a total blankness after knowing they have to just show up at the court. There's this fear of opening up to get help. How do I know that you're gonna be trustworthy? How do I know that you're gonna actually be able to help me? What if you're just another person I tell my narrative to that just, okay, well, sorry, I can't help, go to that next person, and how exhaustive that would be. Dealing with the emotional consequences of whatever led to this current moment. If they're probably saying you related to something trauma related, probably didn't feel good, probably has lots of triggers in it, and to have to recall that with you is really tough. You want to be safe and kind to that person as they share something very vulnerable to them. Additionally, how their previous and how their mental health functioning is. If somebody has a history of depression, knowing how that might show up in the space might be really hard for them. Or if they know they have a lot of PTSD triggers, holding that in the space and saying, I got to show up anyways. It's really hard to be able to show up and be scared at the same time. Again, living situations, current and after, they don't know what their living situation might be sometimes. Are they going to end up in jail, a halfway house? Are they going to end up in a program? Are they going to be able to go home? Or are they going to be on the street? That's a really big fear. And meeting with you is the first reminder, or some of the first reminders, that this is out of their control, that we don't know what's going to happen. And if we stigmatize them in that moment, that stigma sticks and hurts a lot more, because they're there asking you with their vulnerability for help. And if we say something that just shows our bias or judgment, we don't take accountability for it, because we will accidentally say things sometimes because we're flawed humans too. We don't take accountability for it, that leaves injury. And now we've just done more harm to that person that they're going to have to breathe through. Those are big fears that they carry into it. How might this look? Charlie, you want to take us through this part?
Yeah, so this part is how it's going to manifest for you and the types of behaviors you're going to see. If somebody you're working with is triggered by any of those potential fears, is you're going to see a lot of defensiveness and irritability, just very like quickness of just flipping right into aggressive behavior or clingy behavior. If you are that one person that has listened to them, you might see clingy behavior because they don't know who else is safe. Crying when you may not understand why they're crying. There, a lot of people get really jittery. I get really jittery, so I usually have to have like my little device to ground me, to make sure I know where I'm at. You might get some mixed messages, and not sharing the whole story. And sometimes that can be infuriating when you're trying to be a helper to make sure that you're getting the whole story so that you can present it and advocate for them in the way that you know best as a professional. But what happens when somebody is triggered and something, a story like what we hear, what I've experienced, is that person doesn't feel safe sharing the whole story because they've had multiple people that haven't believed them, and so this mixed messages and not sharing the whole story is kind of like a testing phase for them to share part of the story, see how you react to that, and then share more and share more depending on what kind of feedback they're getting back from you. And so if you can reframe it in that sense and knowing that the timeline will come, it is just about how that conversation unfolds. But the no-shows and tardiness is one that I wanted to circle back to because I skipped over that one. That one is a big deal. And I struggled with that one to this day, of just being super anxious for any sort of appointment. That just signifies going for help and then not getting any. and over and over and over again. And so that anxiety is now a part of my psyche. It's a part of my behavior. And so survivors struggle with that one. So if you're expecting a survivor to be on time every single time, you might want to talk with them about some reasonable expectations for them.
Whoa, let's go to the next slide. So in terms of being trauma informed in these relationships, the first thing I want to say too is be human, be yourself, be professional still. But if you put on that air of, I have everything together, I'm only going to talk to you in my professional tone, a lot of survivors are going to feel like you're not being genuine and not really want to talk to you. And regarding kind of the mixed messages or not sharing the whole story, it's okay to ask that too. At the end of the first meeting, you can say, how did this feel for you? Do you feel safe enough to share more? On a scale of 1 to 10, like how much of your story do you feel like you've been honest or told me the whole thing about versus how much more do I still need to learn? I was taught in my job as a therapist that my clients are going to lie to me. And if I don't make it safe to lie to me and tell me that they did, they're going to keep lying to me about things. So I tell every single client, like, I know you're going to lie to me at some point about something because we get scared. We're humans. We care about our impressions. So just know that if you ever come around and say, hey, I got to tell you a different story, I got to tell you the rest of that, I'm not going to shame you and blame you. I'm just going to work to understand that and see why you felt the need to protect yourself so much in that moment so we can support you in feeling safe and confident and comfortable owning your own experience and feelings at that time. So just remember, it's okay. And it's not about you. So when you see some of these behaviors, not always about you, when you see some of these behaviors, ask yourself, like, what else might be going on? How do I not personalize this and make it about me, but what might be happening for that person and how can I show up for them? How can I have compassion for their suffering? How can I empathize into understanding it? So focus on building safety, trust, and rapport. If you want to do the next one, Charlie, we'll go back and forth.
Yeah. Provide essential and useful information, engage in attentive, non-judgmental listening, and ask questions. And when you're doing that, just be really mindful about how your questions are impacting the person you're talking to, and just be careful about it turning into what sort of feels like an investigation.
Yeah, very good point. And look at how you phrase your question. What's the emphasis on and who has the power in that sentence? This is why we use client-centered language, right? It's not someone, you don't say this person who has with borderline, you say this person who has. It's the person is first, they have something. So build common humanity, meaning that you see that you guys are both individual beings in this world who suffer and have joys and laughs and hard times and good times. And if you can, chat about shared interests if time permits. If you build up rapport around, oh, we both like the same TV show or both into comic books, then you have a shared way of connecting the next time you meet them so that there's an easier way to kind of start building safety and rapport every time. But you do want to be careful around trauma bonding. So in terms of shared interests, I recommend against being like, oh, I'm interested in all this trauma and I have all this trauma. And so like, let's talk about trauma. Make it something that's more kind of basic, more general and stuff so that we're not like diving into this, oh, we're bonded through our pain, but let's bond through something life affirming, something that brings us joy. Trauma bonds can get really difficult and quickly. So just be mindful around that. And there's some great books about trauma bonding. We can do more presentations on that if that's a term that's new to you or you would like to learn more about that.
And one of the ways that I like to build a common humanity with the folks I work with is just connecting on what kind of snacks everybody likes. I'm always asking about what's your favorite snack, and that just that's such a question that tends to bring the defensiveness down a bit and allow for just some fun rapport building questions, and because I care about their snacks. And snacks are just amazing. So there's that. Provide context for relationship boundaries, expectations, and options, and having those clear boundaries, clear expectations, and putting those up on the front end is going to help you on the back end, just in case there is any sort of argument that takes place later on down the road. Because if you have a baseline of what those expectations are, you've already put them out there. that's just going to help in the long run. It sets up the survivor for success.
If possible, have a conversation or a worksheet about triggers and methods of assistance that you can recommend, or have a space for them to maybe write down what has worked for them in the past. Help people just acknowledge that triggers are a thing. Let's not stigmatize them. So let's just be supportive of them. So if you have a little worksheet that says, hey, everybody has their triggers. Here's some coping skills that tend to work for people. Which ones work for you? You're engaging in this way of saying, I care about mental health. I understand that you're going to have hard moments here too. And in terms of the boundaries and expectations, even giving them a worksheet on that, something that just says, here are my expectations, here's what needs to be done or what I can do. And then review information and provide written follow-up. I see that we are in a 10-minute window here. So Charlie, we are going to truck through the rest of these.
You got it.
Okay.
Review information and provide written follow-up, because a lot of us have brain injuries and we appreciate that. Let's see. I think I'm doing the potential fears for this one. I'm just going to go through it. Outcome of the proceedings is a major fear. Being dismissed, staying and keeping calm, trying to meet societal expectations, being looked at judgmentally, not being understood, retribution, retaliation, or additional stigmas. Any new experience or previous experience with trauma and that within that system, lack of belief or support system, prejudice, sexism, genderism, racism.
And this might show up in the meetings by, again, not showing up, maybe some pacing, emotional lability, so kind of being up and down, apathetic, disconnected, tearful, might be forgetful, dissociative, not able to perform cognitively in the way that you might want them to as the lawyer in those moments. So having good skills to help them calm down and support them would be beneficial. Operating from survival instincts, interrupting. Sometimes when we get really stressed out, people interrupt a lot. Maybe oscillating with anger and hostility, as well as the clingy, needy individual. So they might just want to hold to you that whole time. So being mindful of those things. Next slide.
And just, I think this is you or me. Oh, Darren Court, this is me.
Yep.
So inform the client of the expectation, local essential. Make sure you have all of the details to them ahead of time. If you need to give them multiple reminders, that's super helpful. Have the grounding tools available to you if you want to bring a little baggie with fidget toys or just something. I like to keep these little stones on me because they're rough and good to the touch, or something to smell, because it's just good to have that on you if someone were to get triggered in the middle of a court session. Check in with your client and make sure they understand what is happening. Take the time to explain or communicate to them that you will explain that later, because sometimes it's triggering when the judge will not actually let them speak in court, or they can't actually use their voice in court. So just making sure you have that rapport with the client to know that you will actually talk to them, you will get to that. Just if they could put a pin in that and come back to it, and that would be good. Do not leave your client in the dark. That's a big no-no. That is a good way to continuously trigger your client. Anything else, Britt?
I'll do the next one on this. I think it was 2 slides for us. Yeah. So be honest and advocate for what your client wants, not what you want, because they might not be the same thing. Help your client have informed choices. Do not make choices for your client without their informed consent. Be comforting and calm. Empathize with them and their experience, and cheerlead when needed, but be honest. Let them know what their strengths are. Show that back to them, and provide real and encouraging feedback. Let them know what is possible, what is not. Empathize when that feedback or what you know is happening isn't going the right way. Be real about it. Next slide. Okay, so post-court triggers. Whatever the outcome is, whether it's good or bad, might be very terrifying and overwhelming to process and deal with. It might be hard to figure out how to deal with next steps, trusting that the follow-up plan is actually going to happen, that the services are going to show up in the way they're supposed to if they're going to be there, or how am I going to live and keep myself safe if I have to go to jail. Keeping to the follow-up plan might be hard for some people, and accessing support resources can be very difficult. So how might this look, Charlie?
depression, exhaustion, anger, grief, relapse, poor follow through, mania, and any combination of the above, maybe multiple at the same time. But this is the part that gets really, really triggering because it is just out of the control. And this is the part where a majority of the support is needed. So if you come with supports, make sure there's an additional person there that can help understand that.
Great.
It's a team of support.
So in terms of how to be trauma-informed post-court, review process, explain, and decompress together if possible. Maybe plan to go to a particular spot or just like sit together for a little bit just to go and review what happened. Again, having the support team and resources ready, that person should know who and where they can reach out to. Ask questions with your client about their experience working with you and how you can improve to make your work better for other clients. Let them know that you value their opinion and that you care enough to hear where you have room to grow. Maintain accountability. If the relationship is over, be clear about this and your boundaries. And work to make it a nice ending by acknowledging their strengths, share something that you appreciated about working with them in the meetings, and just wrapping up kindly. We have to say goodbye to people at times, and it's very rare that we get to have a meaningful one or one that's set with intention. So allow them to have that with you and allow yourself to have that too, so that when you're putting that case where you're like, man, I did a good job. I learned about myself. I connected with a human there, and you know, we did the best that we could. We had real meaningful moments, and that can make a difference in how you experience your own career and your life process within that career.
This would be a good point to introduce the snack.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, I realize that we just have a couple minutes left. I am going to quickly go through this and the next slide, and then we might just do questions. So general information. If someone is being threatening or aggressive, do not stand between them and the door to get out. Give them space to make a clean exit. Remember, if somebody's really triggered in a hostile place, their prefrontal lobe and ability to think clearly is not happening. So don't try to rationalize, don't try to talk them down, just give them space to exit the room. Have grounding tools available. We've said this a lot of times. These little things can be really helpful for keeping somebody psychologically in the space that you're in while working with someone. If they do start dissociating, these grounding techniques can really help. So what are you smelling, tasting, and hearing? Using, again, client-centered language. Do not talk down to people. If something is unclear, explain it differently. It's not on them to have to figure it out. You need to stop and see, how can I explain it to you in a way that would make sense to you? Are they a visual learner? Do they need it written out? Do they need to hear it in a different language? What would be most beneficial for them getting that information? Do not make assumptions about your client's identities. Ask if you need to know. Own your own shit, but don't put it on the client. So if you are in a bad mood, you have irritabilities from something else, you're tired, it will probably impact your work. And it's important to acknowledge that to people who are sensitive to the affect of others. So if you just say, I'm a little bit tired today, I might have a harder time focusing at different points. It shouldn't be a problem today, but I'm going to do the best I can. If I need you to repeat things, I'll let you know, so that I'm taking ownership of it, and that person's not going to sit there and be like, oh, do they hate me? They think I'm boring. That can be really overwhelming. So we want to discourage the ability to read and tell a narrative that would not be helpful and not true in these situations by owning who we are in these moments. And know when you're not in a healthy enough space to do the work. If you go in there and you're not in a safe enough place within yourself, you can do harm to that client. It is healthier to take the day off than to show up in a time when you're not able to do the work. Next slide, please, Charlie. Do you want to do this one?
Go ahead. You're on a roll.
Okay. So build remarks from science and empathy. So use academic papers, have expert testimony. If you make people feel and care, they will respond better than if you're trying to shove painful stats and painful information into them. People don't care about trauma when you traumatize them with it. That gets them caught up in their own experience. So we don't want to overwhelm people with the trauma content that we're giving them. Know your audience and learn the fundamentals of trauma and get comfortable talking about it so that when you need it in court, it just flows from you. So that when you're talking about your clients, maybe difficulty with telling the linear narrative, you're just like, oh yeah, well, we know this from this researcher who said that this happens to people, so that it's just easy for you to access and share the information as you move through your cases. This will be a longer presentation and hopefully a textbook soon that will be more helpful and detailed than what we can share today. And on our last slide, we just wanted to remind you, everybody, that we all have triggers and we can all experience vicarious trauma. Working with trauma can hurt, and we can build up our own sense of post-traumatic stress from this experience. So know your triggers and how you can be soothed so you can support yourself in difficult moments. Set realistic and tangible boundaries for yourself so you can actually enforce them. So if you're like, no, you want to stop work at 5, but you're someone who's never going to be able to do that, maybe set it for 5:30 or 6 so that maybe you're more likely to enforce that. Have your support team in place and plan for yourself. After courts, make sure that you have ways to calm down and support yourself. I know Jamie's really great about this, and I love talking to her about how she takes care of herself after she's had a long court day. And lastly, be kind to yourself. You are the only person you are stuck with your whole life. You want that relationship to be good. You want to know how to support yourself in it and to get yourself through different moments. So I invite you to practice lots of kindness towards yourself. So I think that's what we got.
You both are so incredible, and I'm so grateful for this content. I wish we had more time, and we're definitely going to have to do a repeat of this at some point. We can take a deeper dive into some of the topics towards the tail end. Before any lawyers have to go, I'm just going to launch this poll and let it sit there for a couple of minutes while we're wrapping up, so that if you are an attorney licensed in California and would like CLE, please respond so that we can get you your certificate, and we'll follow up with that in our follow-up email. We will save a little bit of time for Q&A. I know that some folks may have to go, but Dr. Greenbaum and Charlie are both available to stay a bit over. If you do have questions, you can put those in the chat and we'd be happy to go through them. Just one quick thing before people leave, I just want to share with you our next Free to Thrive training is going to be on May 12th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And this will be part 4 in the series that we're doing called Changing the Narrative. And this part 4 is going to be on the expansion of California's vacatur law to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So I hope you all can join us for that. We'll put the link to register in the chat. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Greenbaum and to Charlie for some questions. If anybody has some, you can put them in the Q&A. I don't see any yet, but if you have them, we'll take a minute.
Let us know if you have any questions, if you want us to return to any slides. I know we went kind of quick, and thank you all for the thank yous. We're very happy to be here presenting this information to you all. I know Charlie and I are super passionate about it and can talk a mile a minute about these subjects. So yeah.
So much more to talk about. I kept having like a million thoughts as we were running through this.
One thing that was really interesting, just as if we're seeing if anybody has a question, is so many of the things that you mentioned of best practices to be a trauma-informed lawyer also align with our ethical duties as lawyers and what we have to do. So I was really pleased to see that a lot of what is a best practice as a trauma-informed lawyer actually is what we're supposed to be doing as lawyers no matter what. So that made me happy.
That makes me happy too.
Yeah. Oh, let me see.
Okay. Any tips on helping a client during a meeting when they are getting triggered and their response is anger? Charlie, you want to take this, or would you like me?
Yeah, we can tag team this. I can go first. So one of the major tips, like when you're going into a situation, and this is one of my regular things that I do on a daily basis. I walk into angry situations every day. And what I try to do is just take a step back myself and know that this is not the time or place for me to go in with information. I just kind of give person space to feel what they need to feel and just let them know, like, I'm here and point, and just be very careful how you like
All right, I think Charlie.
I'm never say calm down. I'm not sure why I'm cutting out.
I guess just to follow up on what Charlie was saying too, when someone's responding with anger, we don't want to join them in the anger, but we want to help validate it and let them know it's okay that they're feeling this way, but it's not okay to make you feel unsafe. So if someone's really angry, you can be like, I get why you're upset. This is really upsetting. This is not fair. And I can see that you're really angry at this. How can I help you in holding that anger and being able to manage it later, but we need to get back to what we need to do here. Do you need to take a walk? Do you need this to stop right now? How can we support you in letting the anger go? There's a great book by Thich Nhat Hanh on anger, highly recommended. He talks about how to soothe your own anger, which I think can be really helpful when we're with someone who's angry so that we don't get our own anger activated. I saw a good question in the chat come in too that asked, how can you be sure that you have a trauma-informed lawyer? Ask questions. Ask them, are you trauma-informed? If they say no, you can say, well, here's some things about what trauma-informed is. Do you practice in this way? So taking those principles in and really just interviewing them when you're talking to them and seeing, do they treat you in a way that feels trauma-informed? Do they make you feel safe? Are they asking you questions and actually listening to you? Are they respecting the identities that you bring to the experience? So just ask questions. And if you don't feel like they're treating you in a way that feels safe, that makes you feel heard and good, then I would recommend you maybe interview some other people. Can I share some books as resources after the fact? Yes, so just some good books I'll name really quick. I really like Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. That's a great one for helping yourself heal from experiences. This one is fantastic, Buddha Brain by Rick Hansen. It gives you the basic neuroscience of trauma without overwhelming you in that experience. And it kind of helps you learn how to quiet your brain and support yourself through it. So highly recommend anything by Rick Hansen. There's a great book by Thema Bryant Davis called Thriving in the Wake of Trauma that just gives kind of questions and understanding of how trauma might impact people of different identities and ways to support them. It goes through like trust, safety, and it helps you better understand kind of the nuances of something like that. There's also many a book back here, so if you want more books, just ask. But anything that's going to give you an introduction to trauma could probably be pretty great. I am not going to type those into the chat right now so I can keep answering questions, but maybe somebody else can, or I will hold them up really big for a second so you can take a picture of that. All right.
That's okay. We'll get the list from you and send it in a follow-up email. I know it's a lot of things. I'm sure people are trying to jot them all down, but we'll send them out afterwards.
How to bring trauma-informed lawyering principles into the criminal courtroom setting designed to traumatize the defendant and their family. Yeah, so the setting itself is not trauma-informed, and that is the conversation to have with the client. I will treat you in a trauma-informed way. I'm going to do my best to mitigate any harm in this space, but let's talk about the different harms of the space, what it means, and acknowledge the trauma that's within it so that we're not denying that, and we can try to make ways to keep ourselves feel safer and take power back in this place. Whenever our power is lost, we want to have the lawyer help us revitalize that by advocating for us in that setting and then empathizing with the facts when it is going to be traumatizing. So it's not denying the trauma. It's not hiding from the harm that's there. It's being transparent and real about it, caring about that person's experience and prioritizing their health and wellness and safety as best as you can and knowing the limitations of that.
Multidisciplinary teams can be really effective in this way of like bringing those concerns to the multidisciplinary teams or county task force that are constantly addressing this issue, because there are attorneys that sit on that as well as DAs, and getting that communication between the folks that make those decisions, determining what principles are going to guide the process, having conversations with judges. Those are some approaches.
At the end of the day, trauma-informed means having an understanding of trauma, prioritizing that when you're interacting with people, because you do not know if they have a trauma history or not. And 60% of people, 60 to 70% of people in the US will have experienced a trauma. So it's likely that they would have. And it's caring about that experience for them, but not just seeing them as, oh, you're just a trauma survivor, but they're a person who has survived trauma. They're a person who is resilient, someone who is a human being trying to do the best that they can. So humanizing again and again is part of being trauma informed. What makes you feel safe will probably make other people feel safe. So ask those questions and think about what you need to feel calm in a situation. What makes you feel like you can advocate for yourself or have your brain working as best as possible in that space. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Thank you all for being here. It's really awesome to be able to partner with Free to Thrive so much and work with Jamie Beck. I very much believe in the mission and work of Free to Thrive, and it's an honor to be a trusted ally in this space.
We're so grateful to have you both. And one last thing I want to lift up, I know you didn't have a lot of time at the end to talk about vicarious trauma, and I just want to lift up the fact that you did an amazing training on vicarious trauma for Free to Thrive in the past, and that's also in our past trainings that we include the link. So I really recommend checking that out. For those of you doing this work, so much of what we talked about today is holding space for your clients in those traumatic moments, and just the ripple effects that will have on you, and making sure that you are doing the things to take care of yourself after you hold that space for your clients is just so incredibly important, so you can sustain this work for the long haul. So definitely check out that and keep it out for future trainings on that topic. And just thank you so much to both of you for bringing your expertise and experience on these topics to educate all of us. I'm very grateful to know and learn from you both.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here.
Oh, sorry. I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks for being here. Take care.